Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about one of our current espresso offerings, which is a Peruvian coffee from Agustin Ccoyo. It's our third time working with Agustin and it's a really great example of Peruvian coffee. So Agustin is one of 261 farmers forming the Valle Inca group, based in Peru's Cusco region. The group is headed up by the president Jose Prudencio, who we had the pleasure of meeting and traveling with in Peru a few years ago now. We weren't able to go last year for obvious reasons. And it's a really fantastic group who we're quite happy to work with. We have done for several years. We were first introduced to them via Promoting Peru. And they have a lot of really nice approaches to how to support their farmers, both financially as well as with agronomical advice, help invest in their infrastructures, give them access to a premium market, as well as undertaking some of the logistics of moving the coffee and dry milling it and warehousing it and everything. His farm, Finca Progreso, is situated at 2,150 meters, which is pretty high. And he's only really growing red and yellow Bourbon, a tiny bit of Catamount, but primarily Bourbon varieties. The farm itself is very remote. The closest town is about 50 kilometers away, but it's still a 2-hour drive. It's quite windy, perilous terrain to get there. But also, at Agustin's house, they don't really have much in the way of communication. They have the radio on, and if Jose, the president of the Valle Inca group, wants to visit him, he has to drive to Quebrada and broadcast a message over the local radio station announcing that he's on his way and hope that Agustin is tuned in and expecting them. The approach to farming at Finca Progreso is to be very in tandem with Mother Nature. They're making their own organic compost using spent coffee pulp, manure and pacai leaves from the shade trees they have on the farm as well. And this is applied throughout the year to the plants to enrich them a little further. The actual soil is sort of thick, black, volcanic soil, which is really great for coffee anyway, but this is going to help provide them enough nutrition as well. And as well as coffee, they are growing passion fruits, chirimoyas and rocoto chili peppers. Because the trees grow quite tall during the harvest time, they employ about 5 people at the peak of the harvest, about 2 for the rest of the year. They have to use a hook and a rope to sling up to the top of the coffee tree, bend it over using the sort of willowy stalk to bring it down to a low level to then harvest the coffee cherries. So it's a little more labor intensive. As well as obviously selecting just ripe coffee cherries to process into the high quality lots. The way he actually approaches pruning the trees is quite interesting. Huayna Pata, which is the particular region of Llanatil district in Cusco, is quite humid, and that brings with it some challenges. For example, ojo de gallo, a particular sort of fungus or blight. In order to mitigate that and to reduce the ill effects of humidity, he's letting the coffee trees grow very tall to about 3 meters in height, and the first meter of the tree, all that lateral growth, is pruned away so that air can flow really nicely through the coffee fields. And this is in stark contrast to some of the other producers in the area we visited across the other side of the mountain where it's more arid, where they're actively trying to keep dry matter onto the soil to lock in moisture. Once the coffee cherry is received at the very basic wet mill that they have at the farm, they first float to remove any less dense cherries from the batch, and then pass it through a manual depulping machine. So it's a hand-cranked depulper, quite small scale. And that then goes on to, I've heard it called a criba, but it's basically a sieve with perforations for the coffee beans to go through, but it will catch the skins. You don't really want the cascara, the coffee skins, in with the batch as it's fermenting. It will alter the profile a little bit. So once it's been depulped on the hand-cranked depulping machine, and that's then sealed into a grain pro bag inside a plastic barrel with an airtight lid on the top. There's a little tube running into a water bottle, a carboy basically on the top of it, an airlock. That means as the native microbiome goes to work breaking down that mucilage inside the barrel, the CO2 produced pushes out the oxygen, creating an oxygen depleted environment for the coffee to ferment in. And they're talking about this process as anaerobic processing or anaerobic fermentation, which is terminology we don't tend to write on the bags, but it's a controlled, repeatable environment to ferment in. And the results are actually very clean for relatively long fermentation period, around 36 hours. After that point, the coffee is thoroughly washed and is then put onto raised beds to dry. And they've got a sort of polytunnel on the top with really good ventilation flowing through the secadores, the drying tunnel. That was built courtesy of funds from the Valle Inca group in 2019. And it's really improving the longevity of Agustin's coffee. So the fact that it's very high altitude, nice dense big beans to start with, and then dried very, very carefully after solid processing, means that the coffee has really long legs and can be expressive and sweet for an extended period. Having bought Agustin's coffee for the last 3 harvests, we're actually quite excited because we've just received samples of the upcoming crop to assess for this year, and the coffee tastes fantastic. So we hope to see his name in our range again next year. So that's a little bit of information about where this coffee is from, who produced it and what their approach was. And now we're going to think about what does the coffee taste like. So we're going to prepare an espresso, maybe a milk drink as well, and see what flavors we get in the cup. Okay, we've made an espresso. Our normal house recipe, 16 grams of dry coffee, about 36 grams of liquid espresso. Not too hot on the machine, not too much pressure, a relatively gentle extraction approach. What I really like about Agustin's coffee in general is that it's got a good mixture of being a classic coffee with sort of chocolatey caramel notes, but also really interesting fruit notes to it as well. I tend to find a lot of cherry flavors in his coffee. The fruity notes do add a little bit of extra complexity to what is ultimately really pleasing and satisfying and very classic. Chocolate, hazelnut, caramel, they're all there in spades. You get a lot of that really comforting coffee character. But yeah, maybe it's also in the aftertaste, these kind of dried cherry notes really linger. Sometimes when we have a fairly light roast of a high altitude coffee for espresso, it can be quite bright in terms of acidity, and that's divisive. Personally, I really like it if it's balanced, but a lot of people can find it quite sour. I feel like this is a good option for you if you really don't like sourness in your espresso, but still like clean, light, expressive coffees. It's fantastic, and I'm really excited now to put it in some milk and see how the flavors carry through. All day long, this is how I want to drink Agustin's coffee. It's really harmonious with the milk. It doesn't just cover up the flavors, it actually melds with them really, really nicely. Super caramelly, loads of milk chocolate. It's just really comforting and dessert-like. It reminds me of gianduja, that cocoa hazelnut kind of mix. It's fantastic coffee. It's weird, it tastes like I've got more coffee in there than I put in because it's very prominent still without going out of balance. I would call this coffee an all-rounder because it's fantastic in espresso, it's fantastic in milk drinks. It seems to sort of hold its own and present its character very clearly across those two styles. So really hope you enjoyed learning some more about Agustin's coffee. Thank you very much for watching. We hope to work with him for a 4th year this upcoming season. So keep your eye on the range. And that's it from us for today. So take care and we'll see you soon.